So with the second layer of silicone completed and dry, we can begin to build a silicone wall. The silicone wall is where we are going to make our cut to split the mold so it can be opened. Right now we just have a silicone sock. The reason we build a wall to cut into two instead of just simply cutting down the middle of the silicone skin is that it's much easier to line up the mold if we have a broader area that's cut rather than the thin silicone surface. The thin silicone skin, if cut, will have a very hard time lining perfectly back up together, as it will be thin, flexible, and very prone to moving. A thicker silicone skin wall will solve this issue. In addition, the silicone wall will give me enough thickness to make a cut using a silicone knife that has a registration groove in the blade. And this will create a positive and negative channel, which will fit back together like a puzzle when the mold is closed. The silicone wall is therefore a very important part of this process. First, we must decide where to place the wall, and usually that's very difficult and a little bit stressful to do, but here, because we're making a Mohawk mold, the position of the wall has already been predetermined. The wall is placed directly down the center line of the skull from the back of the skull to the wooden dowel. This is where the cut will end, and this is where the silicone wall would normally end as well. However, someone tipped me off that by building the silicone wall past this point, all the way down to the bottom of the jaw, would make the mother mold much simpler to make. No need for bolting two mother mold pieces together or building a clay wall, etc., etc. To mark the wall, I'm just using a permanent marker pen, as this gives me a guideline so that the silicone wall doesn't get built off kilter by accident. The silicone we will be using is the same, but the catalyzer is going to be different. It's pink, which is different of course, and this pink catalyzer is a much faster setting catalyzer. And the reason to use a faster setting catalyzer is because the weight of the silicone before it sets up means that the silicone can, or sometimes will, sag or flop over. That's because we're going to be applying much more silicone here along the wall than we were when we were building the silicone skin. And it's really boring to stand there for an hour or so trying to keep the wall in the correct place, which is something that sometimes happens when using yellow catalyzer. So using a faster setting catalyzer solves this issue for us, though not entirely, and I do still prefer to build a wall in stages to avoid any issues. The first stage is going to be to build a triangle. The triangle is going to reach the eventual overall height of the wall that I'm after, and it will also reach the overall width of the wall that I am after. Because it's a triangle and not a square, it has a lot less silicone, and therefore it won't be so prone to moving on me or flopping over because of its own weight. I don't have to pay attention once the wall is built, or as much attention in other words. Even though the pink catalyzer sets up faster, it still will struggle to set up if the silicone is constantly moving, which it would be under its own weight if too much silicone was applied at once. The fast catalyzer in doing this triangle trick, or building the wall in stages, is an easy way to avoid a lot of problems. The pink catalyzer is a bit temperamental and will set your silicone up in a matter of minutes if you mix too much catalyzer into it. Usually you can expect a working time of around 10 to 15 minutes at most, and perhaps around 30 minutes before it's ready for another layer. There are multiple variables that you have to consider: the amount of catalyzer mixed into the silicone and environmental factors like heat, for example. When it's warmer, the silicone will want to set up a little bit faster. Sometimes even the batch and the age of the silicone that you're using can impact the setting time. It's best to mix smaller amounts here so you don't waste material, and it can also be really helpful to leave a small piece of a successfully mixed batch behind, so that you can always compare the color of the silicone to a freshly mixed batch, always ensuring that they are mixed the same and therefore behaving like you would expect. More catalyzer would make the silicone more red, of course, and less catalyzer would make the silicone more grayish pink. I've had issues with the silicone not setting properly on me at all, frankly, so be aware of this issue as well and mix the silicone really well. It's also always a good idea to do a test, if you can, before beginning. Once the triangle of silicone is allowed to set up, you can begin to square up that triangle, turning it into a square shape essentially. And you do this by maintaining the width and the height we established in the first step and filling in around the triangle. Because we have a triangle there, we now have support, and the huge mass of silicone we have to add has something to stick to. This keeps it from flopping around and behaving poorly for us. The overall height and width we should be aiming for when making a silicone wall can vary depending on the size of the thing you are casting, of course. Since I'm using a silicone knife with a registration groove in it, I need a wall that's tall enough for the knife but also wide enough to accept the groove without the wall getting very thin. I'll usually aim for something between 2 to 3 centimeters in height and width for my silicone wall. This gives me plenty of room to make the cut using the silicone knife without having to worry, and it ensures the wall is thick enough so that it's plenty stiff, serving its purpose. Thicker silicone is of course stiffer, and we don't want the edges of our mold to flop over when we are casting. We want them to be stiffer so they stay in place.